I spent over $5,500 to bring you the review of the new Corsair i600, or the Corsair One i600, which they claim is kind of redesigned from the ground up in terms of cooling. I just spent the last several days getting very intimate with the temperatures on this thing, and we're going to talk about it today. So I don't ask for much, but at least give this video a like. I'll never make my money back on what it costs to make this video. Be Quiet is proud to introduce their all-new light mount and dark mount ultra-silent mechanical keyboards. Optimized for an ultra-quiet typing experience with factory-lubricated silent linear or tactile switches and 3 separate layers of sound damping. Light mount features a full-size keyboard with an aluminum media wheel and 5 macro keys for streamlined access, while dark mount provides a more modular keyboard with hot-swappable numpad and media dock. Both feature sleek aesthetics, hot-swappable switches, ARGB lighting, and a magnetic palm rest, and are the perfect choice for those who demand comfort, customization, and silence. For more details, visit the sponsored link in the description below. All right, first things first, let's talk about the packaging. So this is the exterior box that it comes in, the label and everything's on that. It's funny, it says 2-man lift.
With one handle?
Yeah, it has one handle, which is literally in the box right there. So anyway, it comes out of that. The system is sitting inside of this box right here. Actually, it's sitting in this bag. Like you get a whole freaking, like a tote for it. Like it's literally in this bag. But it's funny because the handles are upside down, so it's not like you can use the handles to lift it out of the box, because it's like that, and then tucked in the bottom. It's actually a very nice like linen bag though, I'm not gonna lie. Like, my wife's like obsessed with these little handbags and totes and stuff everywhere, so throw that away before it ends up in the collection. Anyway, here's the handle that Phil was just talking about. So this is kind of like the clamshell. This pulls off the top. You can see you've got this very interesting foam. It's not like closed cell or open cell like in the standard side, like the way you would expect it to be. It looks like it's recycled material, but it's pretty squishy and soft. It's like in between the hard styrofoam and the super soft open cell foam. Because obviously it has to be able to survive the loving hands of, this was shipped by FedEx and it did come direct from Asia. So I'm assuming that price potentially has baked in tariffs. I really don't know. Anyway, in the top of the box, when you open it up is, when you pull the clamshell off, is this how to unbox it. It's got the, like I said, all the foam and stuff on it. The only accessories that come with it, and that's obviously have to remove the plastic side pieces, which go in here and lock it closed, whatever. The only accessories that come with it are obviously your power cable, which is plugged in over there now, the wireless that comes with the Asus Z890 Prime ITX motherboard, which is the only way these are configured. And then the Corsair One accessory kit, which is literally nothing more than a headphone hanger. But it's better than the first one we got, because that first one we got was 3D printed because it wasn't even like finalized yet. But this is supposed to like go right there and you can hang your headphones on it. That's the only accessories that come with it. So, and then of course you got your warranty guide and manual and all of that. So in terms of the unboxing, there it is, unboxed. Now I want to talk about the original Corsair One, going back to like, I think it's 2018, 2019, 2017, somewhere around there. The tiny little guy that I did the whole Star Wars theme build on, it was like half the volume of this, because realistically it only came to about right here. It was a very tall upright system. The side panels, both of them kind of like butterflied out to open it up, and there was not 240 AIOs. They're like a very bespoke style, like made just for their chassis. It actually did pretty well. And to date, how long ago that was, that had a 2080 Ti in it. That was actually a pretty well-received system. But the problem was, since then, it's only gotten more expensive, and the parts have only gotten more power and temperature hungry, and the chassis just couldn't keep up, which led to the last Corsair One i600 back in, I think it was 23, where the only way we made it better was to rip out the terrible CPU AIO and put in an air cooler. So one thing that makes this Corsair One kind of unique is it's the i600. Previously they were like the i500s, and they had different versions of it back with the original Corsair One, which depending on the hardware that was in it, designated the number. So it was like, I think you could have like the i300 and like the i500. I can't remember the numbers, it's been too long. But the point was, it came in various specs that were designed to help it be maybe a little bit more affordable and hit different markets depending whether or not you're looking at mid-range gaming, high-end gaming, or entry-level gaming. Although they never really had an entry-level option, it was just far too expensive. In terms of expense, this one comes in one flavor only. Intel Core Ultra 285K 64 gigabytes, dual 32 gigabyte sticks of Corsair, 6400 mega transfers RAM. I'm assuming it's Vengeance. For storage, it has two 2 terabyte drives, a Gen 5 and a Gen 4. So the main OS and Gen 5 drive is an MP700 Elite, which is like one of their fastest DDR5, or not DDR5, Gen 5 drives that they make. And then we have an MP600 Core XT. It's like, how many names can we add to a drive? That's also a 2 terabyte drive, and that's our secondary drive, which is gonna obviously be a good place to put games and any other files that are just separate from the OS. It's got a 1000 watt SFX power supply. I'm assuming it's a Corsair power supply. It is a SFX gold rated power supply. And it has a Palit RTX 5080 in there. So the previous one that we did a review on, which just absolutely was a hot mess in every sense of the word hot, had a 14900K with a tiny 120 millimeter thin AIO, which is not up to the task of 253 watts. And by the way, I might want to point out, all of that was before we really knew about the dying, if you will, or the unaliving of 14900Ks through voltage and wattage limits being too high. There was no chance in hell 253 watts was ever going to be kept cool with a 120 millimeter AIO. And guess what? It didn't. I actually got it cooler by throwing in a tower cooler in there. Let that sink in. That's just how bad. If you don't have enough volume of water and enough heat exchange, which the 120 is not enough for 14.9, didn't matter. We slowed down in that system below a 14700K's performance because of thermal throttling. That's how bad it was. And it went there nearly instantaneously to over 95C and hits 100 in only a few minutes and then starts thermal throttling itself into the ground. Now the GPU in the previous version was an RTX 4090. At least you could spec up to a 4090. I believe that's the only one that actually came with. That was a 450 watt GPU that a very, very tiny 240 millimeter AIO was being tasked with trying to keep cool. So in any universe, a 240 millimeter slim AIO in a small form factor like this being tasked with keeping a 4090 cool was just not gonna cut it. So what happened was all of us reviewers basically crapped all over it. Now the value, you can still crap all over this for the value. I would much rather honestly buy a laptop that is significantly lesser spec than this, to be honest, like something with like even a 5090 or 4090 mobile GPU and a lesser CPU, because at least that is portable. Like that is a fully self-contained unit you can take with you and use. This still, you have to lug around a keyboard and a monitor and a mouse and all of that just to use it somewhere. So it's not exactly the most portable thing. Corsair really just advertises this as being kind of like a very pretty system to sit on a minimalist desk or even a piece of furniture in like a home theater PC or something like that. The sides, as you can see, they are fabric. They're just like the old one, they're magnetically held on. And for all of our testing, it was all done out of the box configuration, just like this. Although we did find previously by taking it off, it really didn't help the temps much, just a couple of degrees. So the mesh on here, the fabric actually does breathe pretty well. Let's go ahead and talk about the software real quick, and then we'll start the teardown and talk about temperatures, because one of the biggest flaws, the absolute worst thing Corsair could have possibly done was ship it with a dashboard that has zero user control. There was absolutely no way to control the fans whatsoever in the previous system. So you just had to let it basically have its own cookout because there's nothing you could do about it. So that's why one of the things that I did in my modifications of the old system, the old Corsair One, was to get all of the fans off of the Corsair's headers and the hub built into it and get them onto the motherboard. That way I could control the speeds and such. They did do a slight improvement to the software where you can go in there now and actually do a little bit of customization. And I do mean a little bit. You can play with the lighting here, so we can do active like RGB effects and such, right? So it's exactly as you'd expect for an RGB device. It doesn't even have a lot of options, to be honest. It's got strobing, it's got Starry Night, which is only the RGB flavor. Can't control that, you can't change that. That's it. You get RGB Starry Night. You get breathing.
You can't pick the color for its breathing?
No, because it flashes between them. See? It's breathing between the RGB spectrum. You can't change the breathing color, and there's no control over that whatsoever. Hey, you get brightness. case you wondered, you do get that. You get the 2 rainbows I already showed and static. That's all you get for the RGB. And that coming from Corsair with IQ, which they've spent so much time trying to perfect, and we know they have a long way to go. It is the weakest implementation of RGB ever. Now that's kind of untouched from the previous version. What is different is if you look here, this is all you got last time. You can see the CPU temp, the GPU temp, CPU fans and GPU fans, right? These are the fans that are present in the system. You have 2 CPU fans, which are the 2 right here. You have 3 GPU fans, the 2 on the top and 1 in the bottom down here. Now the one in the bottom is designed to bring more fresh air into the system, because the idea was if it's bringing in more fresh air, that's gonna help to allow more fresh air to make its way through the radiator. Except in this instance, it doesn't make a lot of sense because the top is intake. So you're just adding another intake. Now, when we talk about the software, that's why I was going into the fan discussion so you can see what those 3 fan configurations are. You can click the cooling button and you get 3 modes. You get quiet mode, you get balanced mode, and you get advanced mode. Advanced mode is where you can go in and set your own user curve. I want you to notice something on this. You cannot set anything below 40C. So what happens is, as you can see right now, all of the fans are basically sitting idle doing nothing because you cannot force it to turn the fans on below 40C. So unless I have this dot brought really low to create a ramp, because I have it set kind of around 50% right now, the second it crosses the 40C, you just hear the fans whoosh turn up. So you can't really ramp that in unless you build the ramp all the way down at 40C. Now, I like to start my fans early to slow down the heat soak. I don't like it. I don't understand why they made it so we have to allow the fans to go 0 dB, 0 RPM mode. I think that's stupid. This is something that could easily be fixed in software. Give the user the options. Now, if you're wondering, this red line is the factory fan curve. It is terrible, and you will see that in the charts when we talk about the fan curve to temperatures. It basically, as you can see, stays all the way flat at, what is the RPM right there, or the percentage right there? That's gonna be right around 500 RPM, because it doesn't say percentage. So it's right around 500 RPM all the way till 95C, then it goes to 100. So it's not the smartest in fans. It's like prioritize silence. Now that's what happens if you stay on balanced. Quiet mode technically is worse as far as I can tell, but there was no reason for me to try quiet mode. You'll see why when you see the balanced mode temperatures. That's for the CPU, and you have to control the fans independently, which I think is really stupid. Allow me to pair them because there are 2 per radiator. I'd like them to behave the same. There's no reason to have them have to be independently controlled. They should be paired because they are cooling a component as a pair. So that's really dumb, by the way. So GPU 1, same thing. Can't do anything below 40C, and you can see that stays about as silent as it possibly can until 80C when it goes up to 100%. So this is the fan curve I came up with when I did my fan curve testing, because I didn't want to, and you can see I did the best I could to make them match, but they'll never match perfectly because, like I said, you can't link them together. But I decided not to do a test where we just put the fans at 100%, because I would like the system to shut up when I want it to, because these fans are capable of going over 2200 RPM. So they make a lot of noise when they're blowing full speed, especially when they're going through a radiator and all of the turns and changes that they have to make. All that turbulent air makes noise when it touches something. So I don't want it to just be 100% at all times, but I had it set so that when the temperatures get critical, it goes to 100%. Now we do have an a water-cooled 50-80, so realistically we should never see 70, 80, 90, or 100C. If we saw 100C, something's wrong, because the GPU thermally is not allowed to go above like 85. So that is the improvement to the software, but it needs some work. It really does. All right, let's go ahead and shut this down real quick. We'll do the teardown. Well, I guess not really a teardown, but I want to show you guys what I mean about the airflow in this thing with everything being positive pressure, because everything is intakes. So to get inside of it, and this is what you would need to know if you're gonna ever change out a drive or RAM or any of that. On this side, if you're facing it on the left side, this is just held on magnetically. And then you've got a Phillips screw right here, not captive, so hang on to it. And you got a Phillips screw right here. and then this just literally pulls off. So I can see they did extend the AIO all the way to the end, which is, all of us looked at that and went, why? Why did they not extend wider? And it looks like they have wider fans in here now too. These may not quite be 20 mil fans. We'll look at them in a sec. But it looks like they might have actually gone, yeah, they did. So they're not slim fans, they're actually 25 mil fans. So there's an improvement there on the fan. Because remember, that was one of the first things I tried to do to make an improvement, was to put better fans in because they were slim. I still have the fans floating around somewhere. Anyway, to get the side panel open, right here where the CPU cooler is, so you can access your RAM and storage and all that, you take off this bottom screw right here. You ignore Corsair's little like, hey, see, it like rips apart the second you look at it. Magnuson Act, you can't void the warranty for me doing this. Nice try, Corsair. So as soon as you take that off, it's gonna destroy that label, so they now know you opened it, which doesn't matter in the US. It's illegal to void a warranty from opening something up. Then it swings out. There is our little 240 AIO. Now obviously it had to be custom designed to where the tubes are coming out in a area where it's not getting too impacted, because obviously you can't use standard length tubing and such. This is all very small. But I was right, it is Corsair Vengeance memory that you can see in there. Our MP700 Elite drive is the one that has the heatsink on it right there underneath the CPU. So that would be fairly easy to access. You can see right here, we have the tubing for the GPU, which comes all the way underneath the GPU, which is this middle bar right here, as I mentioned, kind of blocks any of this cold air from getting to it. We'll bring up the coolant into the top, and then this is intake, so it blows down. Now, one thing that this fan is probably helping with, yep, and I can see it now. Okay, so you can see the heat sink right there. I did call out the fact that this is a Palit 5080. It's really tiny, as you can see. So I really don't know if this is an adapted GPU to be used with this build, or it was built to spec from Corsair. But either way, that's the inside. The teardown isn't that complicated. If I wanted to take this AIO out, all I have to do is undo the 4 screws around the CPU AIO, pop that out. The wiring for it is just right here, going to a single header on the motherboard. Getting the GPU out would require breaking another label, taking off this little cover right here. That would give you access to be able to see the PSU. I wonder if the PSU gets fed. Yeah, I think the PSU also gets fed by this fan potentially. Let's see. There we go. Oh, interesting. Okay, so the Corsair, so the power supply is getting fed from the bottom. That's interesting. I do like how they completely redesigned this bracket. Because remember, this was just holding up the GPU and the fan was a slim fan. So they've recessed it more to fit a 25 mil fan. And they have this right here to actually guide the air more towards this direction, which is kind of interesting because that's blowing some of it away from that heatsink. So you can see that heatsink down there. I mean, there's probably still more than enough air hitting it, but it's clearly guiding it into different directions in the bottom down here, which is gonna help with cooling, like I said, some of the bottom drive. So the core drive is right here. I don't know if you can see that, but all the way under the GPU. So you're not getting that out very easily. So, okay, GPU fan 3 now is very important, obviously. But when we look at the charts, you'll see that there was some unique behavior with some of the temperatures. All right, let me put this back together. We'll take a look at the back side real quick, and then we'll get into the temperature. Okay, so this is the back of the other side. This is where you can see they have their hub, which reminds me of like the older Commander Pros. There's even an additional fan header on here. Not that there's anywhere you could put it. Now they do have the SATA power down here, or the SATA data cable, as well as the SATA power cable down here, tucked away right there. If you want to add a SATA drive to this, you can. This is the bracket of where it would go. You just route the wire up to it. They're just already pre-wired there, that way you can use them. It's interesting though to me that they go through the trouble of using a very Commander-like device, but still have really no functionality built into it to do anything really custom or useful. Because in IQ, you can set fan curves based on GPU temperature and CPU temperature. We've talked about the importance of having an overlapping curve. That way, if the GPU and the CPU are under load at the same time, it's not like the GPU just sits there idle, getting melted to death because the fans are tied to the CPU only. You can do in IQ, you can create custom curves. So it's just still mind-boggling. Your mind all like trapped in a bottle as to why they don't utilize IQ for this. I don't understand it. So just to kind of show you, right? the fans are off when it's just sitting there. To be able to basically have anything happen with the fans, I have to put it under some sort of load. Okay, so you'll see what I mean about the airflow right now. So the top is all intake, right? You can see the side right here for the CPU, that's intake. And then the bottom fan, this is why I did not want to leave the 100% fan curve. There we go, now the GPU has finally ramped itself up. So check this out, it'll pull the air down, no problem. See that? Now the side fan right here should be, yep, that's pulling in, CPU's pulling in. Now what you'll notice is basically all the hot air right now is exhausting out the back, which isn't a bad thing, but see that?
So it's full positive pressure.
It's full positive pressure. Except some of it, as you can see, gets forced out right here, look at this. Yeah, because it's full positive pressure, look at that. It's gonna exit anywhere it can find because nature finds a way. So I just wanted you to understand the airflow characteristics. I'm still trying to figure out exactly where the power supply is supposed to get its air from, because look at this. But it gets like only from this little gap right here, and that right there, and that right there. So let's just ask our power supply to melt to death, shall we? That is not, in my opinion, enough airflow for the power supply, because that fan, as you can see, is taking a lot of the air. But watch this, what if I just put just a little bit gap? So look at that, now the power supply.
Yeah, you can actually see it exiting now.
What a stupid design. All right, now that you guys understand how the fan profiles work, how the fans work, the arrangement of the fans and the airflow, let's talk about the actual temperatures. So I use OCCT for my CPU test. I use Furmark for the GPU test. It's like a OCCT for GPUs, if you will. And then I use Cyberpunk for both CPU and GPU, because that's a real world scenario of which CPU is under load, system memory is doing something, and the GPU is obviously doing a lot. So let's start with our 285K, our Core Ultra 285K in OCCT 20-minute loop. You'll see it hits 100C in about 170 seconds. Not very long. It's just not, it's not good. That AIO is just not good enough for 253 watts, which, by the way, it does pull the full 253 watts for the entire duration of the load. So its PL2, its power limit 2, is set to 253, which means after the first power limit has exceeded, whatever seconds those are, revert to PL2. Those numbers are the same, it just stays the same. 253 watts is a lot to ask of this cooler at its balanced fan curve. So the first chart you're gonna see here is balanced fan curve. Then we'll go through everything again with my fan curve and you'll see the improvements. The blue line on the bottom is actually me charting DDR5 temperatures. Because the fans from the AIO for the CPU blow directly on the motherboard, that means we're gonna be getting some airflow over those components, which is good. I just wanted to see how well that airflow helps those components or potentially hurts those components if it's blowing warm air directly on it. But as you can see, 100C, nearly instantly, spiking 105 one time. I don't know what happened there, but that was way above its TJ max. Actually, technically that's its max, TJ max, where it starts to hard throttle, but it starts to soft throttle less than 200 seconds into this test. So yeah, it's kind of unfortunate, but OCCT is a very hard test to run. This is CPU only, not using RAM or anything like that. So that's why the RAM temperatures start at 45, dip a little bit, and then come up to just under 50C. That curve is interesting because RAM isn't being used at all for OCCT. You can see what the effect of that warm air is blowing on the RAM, which only increased it about 2.5C. So nothing, no concerns there. But if we talk about Cyberpunk 2077 for CPU, look at that DDR5 trend line. It is trending up and still trending up at the end. The reason why is now you've got real world scenario happening here where the RAM is doing something in a game, but you don't have the CPU being hit hard enough to ramp up the fans. So remember, the fans are probably only about 1100 RPM in this particular scenario here where our CPU is hovering in the 65 to 70C range. So the RAM is just getting warmer and warmer and warmer because there's no real active airflow from the cool side. but you have the GPU on top blowing warm air directly on it. Now the GPU air is going to be much warmer than the CPU air because the CPU is 253 watts, whereas the GPU is 360 watts with nearly identical AIOs. So you can see that RAM going from 45C up to just under 65C by the end of the test. 20C increase, not done climbing. 20 minutes wasn't long enough for it to reach equilibrium. I thought it would be given the small volume of the coolant and the air. Nope, not enough. So that's a troubling trend to see it continue to go up. However, it is only 50% of the way up its max operating temperatures for the RAM. You don't want the RAM to get too hot because it will slow down, which will also slow down your overall performance, but it is not a troubling temperature. It's just a trend I don't like to see. So for the 5080, which is a Palit card, as we already talked about, in Furmark 4K 20-minute loop, it does something interesting, and I don't know why. I had to verify this several times to make sure the behavior is correct. There was nothing weird or stuck with the fan curve. You'll notice this trend where it's smoothly climbing, and at about the 10-minute mark, or the 600-second mark, you can see it then suddenly does a U-turn and starts coming back down. That number was 70C. Once it hit 70C, then the GPU fans ramped up a little bit more, which was enough to overcome the load and bring the temperature back down about another 5C from that point down to 65. And you can see the other blue line on here, the slightly more transparent blue line, those are the VRAM temperatures on the GPU. And remember, we know that GPU fan 3 is directly responsible for cooling that because that's what the heat pipe and that heatsink is attached to, is the video card RAM, or the VRAM. You can see it start to trend down because that means the GPU 3 fan started turning on a little bit more aggressively. Cyberpunk 2077 in 4K Ray Tracing Ultra preset, you can see the temperatures come up much more consistently. And they do not do the weird higher fan curve and then dip back down. In fact, it just kind of continues to go up. But although in gaming, it never hit 70, it only hit 65. So obviously Furmark hits it much harder than games do, but it was still slightly trending up. So I now know in the future I've got to do 30 minutes or more on these tests because it's not quite enough to see full equilibrium on there. The VRAM temperatures as well, following the exact same trend line as the core. Now let's go ahead and move on to my fan curve, as you guys saw. So going back to OCCT with the CPU, you can see we dropped 10C by simply allowing the fans to go a higher percentage sooner. And so we didn't hit 100C even one time. In fact, a couple of times we spiked into the mid 90s, but it came back down to an average temperature of about 87C with my curve. Now my curve is still noisy. You can hear the stock fan curve as well. Mine makes more noise than that, but it's important now that I kept the full 285K performance because it's not thermal throttling, which we did after only 200 seconds on the first test. But I also want you to look at the DDR5 temperature line, the pink line on the bottom. You can see it stayed about 2.5 to 3C cooler just because more airflow blowing on it from the GPU, or excuse me, from the AIO for the CPU, because we kept that air refreshed with more airflow. More static pressure means cooler air was reaching the RAM, so it wasn't quite as increased. Now, if we talk about the same scenario when it comes to gaming, the CPU in Cyberpunk 2077, we went from an average up to 70 to 75C all the way down into the 55 to 60C for the CPU temperature. But more importantly, you can see the blue line that's getting drawn right across the pink line. That was the DDR5 temp with the old fan curve. With my fan curve, the DDR5 actually trended down. Now, the reason why in the balance profile, the DDR5 trend line was going up significantly when gaming is because the RAM is doing something. In OCCT, it doesn't do anything. It just sits there unless you enable the RAM test. But in Cyberpunk 2077, the system RAM is responsible for a lot because there is a big impact on CPU in Cyberpunk. There's a lot of world stuff happening that the CPU does. Because the CPU was not getting up to its 80, 90 degrees temperature you were seeing on OCCT, it never told the fans to turn on anything higher than about 1100 RPM, which means you're getting very weak airflow through that radiator, which means just about no airflow on the RAM at all, from the cool CPU side anyway. Plenty of airflow is happening from the GPU side, as we showed you, is blowing hot air directly down on top of the RAM. Now the RAM is not too hot. I mean, like I already said, 60C, 65C on the DDR5 is cool enough, but why run it warmer than you need to? Because as you can see with my fan profile here, I've got it dropped all the way down to 45C. I didn't change anything. It's the exact same test running back to back. The difference is the fan profile. So by allowing the fans to ramp up to between 1800 to 2000 RPM on the CPU, even though the CPU is not under that much load, not only dropped the CPU almost 20C, it also allows a lot cooler air to touch that RAM to counteract the heat being blown on it by the GPU. Now, if we look at firm arc for the GPU, you can see with my balance or my fan profile not using balanced, we don't have that crazy climb and then drop. It's just starts at about 57C, and then the fans come on pretty aggressively because that's the way I set it to. And then the temperature actually settles over the next 200 seconds and then goes completely flat for the rest of the test, hovering at about 55C. So we went from that 70C max, and which dropped down to 65, down to 55. So we dropped 10C on our graphics card, which we know also is going to give us quite a few boost bins when it comes to the GPU frequency. We also dropped the GPU memory temperature a lot. So if you look at the blue line on top for the VRAM on the balance profile, you can see it kept climbing and then kind of came down. My VRAM never exceeded 60 even one time with the fan profile set, because that GPU 3 fan is blowing cool air on the heatsink attached to the VRAM from the start. So it never allowed the VRAM to even start to get warm. And then last but not least, let's talk about games in that realistic scenario. 55C is where I capped out once again with my fan curve in Cyberpunk, but the VRAM in the game is a whole different story. So the GPU with the balanced fan curve was capping out around 70C, as we talked about, and the VRAM on the card reached all the way up to 75C, in fact, over 75C, almost 80C. So if you take a look at my fan curve, you can see that the VRAM never exceeded 60C, but the GPU also never left the 50s. 55C was the average on there. But we dropped just about 20C on the VRAM alone. That's kind of crazy, because that's nothing but fan curves. All right, let's talk about the i600 and whether or not it's worth it. I'm telling you right now, I'm like $5,600 into this video or something like that, because it was $4,999 for this one flavor, plus tax, plus shipping. I felt this one, but I was really curious because when I saw at Computex that, hey, the new i600 is going to be launching on the, well, I think the ordering, in fact, I actually ordered the system at the, I think it was the 31st of May or something like that during the little pre-order window, because I want to make sure that I got one for this video. There's improvements, but it's very impossible to really measure how much those improvements helped the previous version, because this isn't the previous version. All right, so whether or not this is a better design than the old one, I don't think we can argue with the fact that more CPU cooler is better. That's essentially all they changed. I mean, with the thicker fans as well. The slim fans, ooh, that was not getting the job done on the previous one. Now here's the downside. The previous gen running a 4090 and a 14900K, the previous PL1 and PL2 Max was 245. This one's actually running 253. Now, 120 millimeter AIO, 245 was still far too much. Like realistically, it needed to be like the theoretical doesn't exist, Intel's like 180 watt, because we lost so much performance on the previous one, it dropped down an entire level of CPU, like an i7 from a 9.9. The GPU, essentially the same exact cooler setup, but from a 450 watt GPU without moving any power sliders, which are available to it on that card, I think it was an MSI card. Anyway, I digress. Down to 360 watts worth of GPU on this one. So realistically, that one's kind of an asterisk, I can never say that word. It's a cheat because they just reduced the demand on the cooler. The CPU, as you can see, if you don't go in there and tune it, if you're just a layman who bought the system, put it on your desk and out of the box, and are doing anything CPU intensive with it, will throttle continuously, which is a problem still. But in real world scenarios like gaming and stuff, the temperatures were kept pretty well in check-ish. They weren't in check until I did my profile, which wasn't even possible on the previous one. The problem is, you could give everyone on the previous one an upgrade, essentially, by just allowing fan control. And I'll be honest, I don't know if they ever did that on the previous one, because we mutilated ours and then put it on the shelf and forgot about it. I don't think at the end of the day, I would say there's many people like running out to buy these, considering the fact that you're spending 5090 pre-built desktop money to get a 5080. And here's the other thing that I find a little disappointing about this. For this price point, if Corsair really wanted to say, hey, let's give the buyer the most value that we possibly can, and it's really awkward to use the V word in a $5,000 product. They didn't even give CUDIM for this system, which is kind of the main benefit of running a Z890 platform for Intel, because it's the only platform that can utilize CUDIM now. And the CUDIM memory is not that much more expensive than the standard DDR5 stuff. So it seems like it's just, I mean, there's too many trade-offs, I feel like, with this system to really recommend it, to be honest. There's not a whole lot I feel like I could do to even improve this one, because the fans already go up to over 2,200 RPM if you max them out. I honestly think at this point, just buying a cheaper laptop might make most sense if you're looking for small form factor, because at least it is fully self-contained and can travel. All right, there we go. Like I said, I will never make my money back on this video. Please do me a favor and give this video a like if you appreciated it, because I saw it, I was like, I gotta compare it. I have looked at every single Corsair One since they came out, and by buying this one means it's obviously as independent as possible, which we always aim for, independence. And even if it's a sponsored video from other brands, we don't let them control the messaging anyway if we have critiques to say. It's improved, but I don't think it's $5,000 improved.